Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to council tonight and for use at home, to youths, to you at home watching us on our streaming. Thank you very, very much. And this is the 9th meeting of the 143rd Council of the Corporation of the City of St. Thomas. And we will ask, is there any disclosures of interest from any of the members? Seeing none, then let's go with minutes.
Your Worship, I have a motion that the minutes of the meetings held on January the 16th, 2023 be confirmed. Moved by Councillor Herbert, seconded by Councillor Gibson.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
No deputations this evening. Council will resolve itself into committee of the whole to deal with the following business. First committee this evening is Strategic Direction and Development. First item relates to an application by the YWCA of St. Thomas Elgin for proposed official plan and zoning amendment for 21 Kane Street. And I have a motion that report PD 03-2023 relating to the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments for 21 Kane Street be received for information. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor McCauley.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Carried.
Next two items are notices of public meeting to take place on February the 9th, 2023 at 3 p.m. Using Teams. And that's from the Site Plan Control Committee to consider two proposals. The first is a proposal for the affordable housing development at 21 Kane Street. And the second is to consider a proposal for a 63-unit condominium at 76 Cortland Terrace. Your Worship, no further items on the agenda under strategic development unless there are any items from the members. And seeing none, we'll move into community engagement and services. Nothing noted on the agenda at this time unless there are any items from the members.
Seeing none.
Move into infrastructure and civic operations. First item relates to a tender award for Talbot Street construction phase 3 from Mary Street West to Ross Street. I have a motion that report ES 0223 relating to the Talbot Street construction phase 3 from Mary Street West to Ross Street tender award be received for information, and further that the tender submitted by Cassidy Construction London Limited in the amount of $6,571,674.85 excluding HST be accepted. Moved by Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Herbert.
Questions or comments on the RFP? Councillor Peters.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I have two items I wanted to raise. One, it was nice, well, three items, I guess, because my opening comment would be just to see how the tender came in significantly under what was budgeted. And a couple things I've given the city engineer the heads up on this one, but I'm wondering if we could direct staff to work with Port Stanley Terminal Railway to look at the feasibility of installing a proper red flashing light rail crossing signal lights at Talbot. I noted last summer during the car show that when the trains came in, they had to put a flagman out. Even though the train was coming, people kept moving across Talbot Street in either direction. And I just think we've all grown up to learn about red flashing lights. I know in speaking with Dan Vernacht that there's some signal lights available out there that could be utilized. So I'm just hoping that staff could work with PSTR to, I figure if we're going to dig this up, it might be, why dig it up down the road if we're ever going to have to do it again. So that's the one thing I'd appreciate any comment from Justin of having staff take a look at it. The second one is, historically, there had been a sign at John and Talbot Street pointing to this, to the Lord Elgin Branch Legion. And it appears that in the last round of construction on John Street, they were doing some work. It may have disappeared. And I'm just wondering if staff might be able to reach out to the Legion. I know the individual that approached me has a good concept of what the sign looked like, but if that sign was there, and I think it's important that we direct people to the Royal Canadian Legion. So that's my other question of Justin or comment to Justin. Thanks.
So we can check into both of those. Justin, did you want to approach either of them now?
If council's interested in doing both, there should be no problem.
Great. Before you leave, I'm really pleased with the amount of communication that's been happening between merchants downtown and the rest of the city on how this project will work and kind of how it will go. And we're kind of predicting the same amount of communication through the construction time. So we know a reconstruction of a community street as busy as Talbot Street will take a lot of foresight and hope for good weather. So I know you're hoping the same, but congratulations so far to your staff and the information they've been sharing, and will continue to do so, I hope. Okay, Councillor Wookey.
Thank you very much. While Mr. Lawrence is there, could you just talk a little bit about those numbers? Like between those three tenders, they've come in under budget, aggregated total of something like $1.7 million, something like that. If they come in and they stay under, what can we do with that money? And you and I were talking about this, and I thought it was interesting, and maybe share that with council about what our obligations are for those excess revenues. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence?
Thanks. So as you said, there's about 1.5 million of aggregate savings. It's important to note that that money comes from three different sources for these projects. So some's from the sewer reserve, some's from the water reserve, and some's from the tax base. So in theory, the money would need to go back to those places or be spent out of those categories. At this point in the season, it's very early still, and it's probably not wise to, identify projects for the 1.5 million. But if council's interested, and as tenders proceed and we see a better picture, of course, it's council's within your purview to assign different projects. If you were to pick different projects to be built this year, I'd suggest picking ones that have a low amount of startup time to them. So for example, a road rehab as opposed to a full sewer and water and road rebuild. But yet absolutely up to council to work with that. Probably some input from the treasurer at that point if you wanted to reallocate the funds.
Thank you.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Next item.
Next item relates to another tender award, Coin Street and Simcoe Street construction at Churchill Crescent and then Churchill Crescent to First Avenue. I have a motion that report ES 0323 relating to that construction tender award be received for information, and further that the tender submitted by Cassidy Construction London Limited in the amount of $3,469,777.43 excluding HST be accepted. Moved by Councillor Kohler, seconded by Councillor Baldwin Sands.
Questions or comments on this tender? Councillor Baldwin Sands first, please.
Thank you. Through to you to Mr. Lawrence, if I could, please. It's in regards to the tenders, and it's noted in the one report that you don't use the complete street model. I was wondering if you could explain as to why complete streets were not.
Lawrence?
So are you possibly referring to the sidewalk on, okay. So on Simcoe Street, we believe that a sidewalk makes sense to push through because it's a real connection. It's in a school area, it's a commercial area, so it makes sense to push it through. On Coin Street, it doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't connect to anything. So what we did was we asked the public how they felt about adding a sidewalk or not. If they had felt strongly about doing it, we would have added it. In this case, there was very little interest at all in adding the sidewalk. So we thought there's no need to cut trees, shorten driveways if the people on that local street don't want it. If it was a collector or larger, we would probably, and we believed in it, we would probably suggest it, but not in this case.
Great. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you very much for that answer. It is appreciated. The other question that I have is that there is no tree replacement or enhancement on Coin or Simcoe for this project. Did I read that correct in the report?
Mr. Lawrence?
Thanks. In general, we'll plant as many trees as we can find spaces for. regardless of how many are removed. So if we go down a street and there's a lot of empty boulevards, then we will place them after in a separate contract, not in this tender, but as a separate overall city contract.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Herbert.
Thank you, Worship. Well, I basically, I did have the same question as Councillor Lori Baldwin Sands about the sidewalks on Coin Street. It appears there was a discussion on having a sidewalk. So is the expectation that children can walk on the street in a storm or a rainy day or something? And who takes responsibility for that? Are they to walk on the grass? I know there's a public easement, which is what, 30 feet from the middle of the laneway up in the people's grass, but is that the norm for cul-de-sacs in, not to put sidewalks in if the people don't want them, or is it, do you make that decision? I just worried about safety of the kids walking down streets, and especially at dark at night, there's no sidewalk to walk on. Anyway, you kind of answered it, so.
We've listened to the people. Is that Mr. Lawrence?
It's really council's decision in the end. You may recall in London in the last few years, they forced the sidewalk issue and it was really unfavorable. I think the smaller the street gets, the more it's really up to those people. If there's 10 people on a cul-de-sac and they want it or don't want it, I would go with that. Anything larger, I would suggest that between staff and council, we decide and force it to happen. But in this case, I guess it's up to council in the end if you want to do.
Mr. Or
Yes, just to
Councillor
follow up to
Herbert?
Justin. So you're saying, I'd like to know your opinion. Do you think we need a sidewalk, or are you just throwing it back to council and say we decide it? You're the experienced person, so I just want to make sure we do this right the first time, that's all.
Mr. Lawrence?
Our recommendation is no, it's not necessary. We could have gone either way. If the people had have really wanted it, we would have said that's fine, but it's not necessary to force it in. Yeah.
Further questions or comments? Councillor Peters.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I noted that this contract and the previous one were both awarded to the same company. We're confident that, especially with the scope of the Talbot Street project, that they're going to be able to undertake both projects simultaneously.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yes, this company has two large underground pipe crews, and generally they would only use one on each job. They're both a bit tight to use two. So yes, they're okay. They also have the ability to draw from the collective local union to increase their workforce. So as they need more, they can gather more laborers or equipment operators. We did question them on that. We interviewed them, and they were confident that this volume is okay for them. Two projects of this volume.
Further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
Next item relates to the Parkside Drive and Bell Avenue construction from Elm to the south limit. I have a motion that report ES 10 relating to the Parkside Drive and Bell Avenue construction from Elm Street to the south limit tender award be received for information. And further, that the tender submitted by PVX Construction Limited in the amount of $3,999,691.81, excluding HST, be accepted, subject to receiving a permit to take water from the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. Moved by Councillor Wookey, seconded by Councillor Baldwin Sands.
Questions or comments? Councillor Baldwin Sands, then Councillor Wookey.
Thank you very much. Through you to Mr. Lawrence, if I could, please. On this, on page 12, you are also talking about the sidewalks on Sunset Drive. I was hoping you could provide some commentary during the recent election, especially a lot of the residents in that area were talking about the timeline about the sidewalks for that area. So I was hoping you would be able to provide further comment. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think both the public and council and staff have kind of noted an interest and a need for that sidewalk, especially since the Shaw Valley subdivision has been built and the two schools are in place. It's visible. You can see people walking up and down there, and there's no question that it would add to the safety. The Shaw Valley group of residents did request some kind of connection in there as well. And it actually makes sense for us to ask the developer to contribute towards that in terms of financing. So we've got it in the draft conditions of the next phase of their development that they would contribute towards it. The actual cost contribution isn't figured out yet, but it makes sense to have them fund a little bit of that bill because the new generation of PEDs comes from that area. The connection would go all the way from Lovedays. It would come down to the new signal and then it would continue down to Glenwood. So it would connect the whole neighborhood together nicely.
Great. Councillor Wookey.
Thank you. Mr. Lawrence, my former colleague in the Towns Valley District School Board at John Wise and Parkside are they're pretty freaked out about this in terms of traffic. And I know that there's a plan, and I've talked to you and I've talked to Pat about this, but if you could just talk a little bit about the traffic plan for that, because there's a massive number of people that go down there every day. And I know it has to do with the putting the lights first on Sunset, but if you could talk about that for a minute, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence.
Exactly to the point, and that's the reason why we suggested doing the traffic signal first. Because if Parkside Drive is closed and all the traffic goes out to the south and through that intersection, it would have been very, very busy. So first phase is get that traffic signal in, which allows both the schools access in and out in a safer way. During the Parkside project, it's very deep and there's actually quite a bit of groundwater, so it'll be difficult to get cars out at all times. So we don't want to force any school traffic through Parkside Drive. We want to have it all come out to the south. We've talked quite a bit to the school and worked out a pedestrian plan, a school busing plan, and an access plan for parents. And so we think we have a good solution, and including a better way on the little stub that goes into Parkside John Wise to get some sidewalks along there as well. It's always been a blank spot where there was basically just road and no sidewalk. So we're going to make a connection in there and get the John Wise kids up into the pathway and into the school, and then also down to Parkside.
Councillor Wookey.
Thank you. Will this be published through Thames Valley School Board, or will this come out through our city website, or both when the time comes? Because obviously there's hundreds and hundreds of parents that are going to be very interested in finding out about this. Thank you.
Both, I hope. We'll certainly publish it, but the distribution straight to parents is the best way to get to that subset, I think. So hopefully both, and we'll encourage them to do that.
Okay. Further questions or comments? Councillor Peters.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Two questions, Justin. One, at the new, I like that name, Stubb Street. I don't even think that is named as a street, that little stretch of road. Maybe we need to consider something for it. So at the Stubb Street intersection of Sunset Drive, is it going to be a turning lane north and a turning lane south so we can keep traffic flowing as quickly as possible? Like, will we have a bit of a lead up to that intersection so that if cars are going south, cars aren't going to get backed up to stop them from turning north?
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes, it'll be 2 lanes outbound. So a right turn lane to the north and a left turn lane to the south, and then 1 inbound lane, and ideally as wide as possible as well because of the bus traffic, and making a bit of a wider turn, as well as fitting in a sidewalk along there. So we're just working out the final geometry of that sidewalk, and but definitely we want to have all 4 of those components in.
Councillor Peters.
Thanks, Your Worship. And my second question would be staging on the sidewalks from Stubb Street to Lovedays. I would hate to see us, the students, I realize it's priority, but I think, is there a way that we can stage that so that sidewalk goes in more towards the end of the school year? Because if we start digging it up, then the poor children are going to have to be walking down the west side of Sunset. And can we sort of delay the installation of the sidewalks to mid-June so that it sort of lightens the load as far as pedestrian traffic?
Mr. Lawrence.
Yes, it's a good point. So traffic signal first, get the Parkside underground work going, and then come back and do the sidewalk in summer. And so in ideally July, August, I guess, and make that connection. There's not a lot of tree removals. There's a bit of grading to make that sidewalk work, but I agree, July, August is the best probably timeframe.
Good thinking. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? That's carried.
The last item for this committee on the agenda is the Drinking Water Quality Management System Operational Plan and Policy Endorsement. I have a motion that report ES 0923 relating to the operational plan and policy endorsement for the St. Thomas Water Distribution System be received for information, and further the council approve the Drinking Water Quality Management Operational Plan and Policy. Moved by Councillor Kohler, seconded by Councillor McCauley.
Questions or comments on the report? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
Your worship, unless there are any further items for this committee, and seeing none, we'll now move into corporate governance and administration. First item relates to community grant applications of January 2023. I have a motion that report TR 0323 relating to community grant applications for January 2023 be received for information, and further the council concur with administration's review of the applications received, and further the council approve the recommended community grant requests in the amount of approximately $5,400. Moved by Councillor Baldwin Sands, seconded by Councillor Gibson.
Questions or comments? Councillor Kohler, Councillor Herbert, Councillor McCauley, Councillor Clark.
Thanks, your worship. On the movie night request, I'm just curious if this is like a new direction based on the strategic plan, because I know several events that have been held there in the past that in my mind would meet the cultural view for different performances that they have there weren't considered in the grant. So I'm just wondering if this is a new direction going forward, and then also if the money is granted based on some of the other performances that actually paid for that. I know there was some content that wasn't more or less language at that time. Some of the bands playing music that the language wasn't quite favorable. Will there be any type of, especially since we're going to grant money, like restrictions to the type of movies like R-rated, or like will they be PG? How will we go about making sure that we don't get the same sort of complaints for the I guess maybe inappropriate language or content?
Thank you. Councillor Herbert.
Thank you, worship. Well, I would recommend that we take a look at the MI understanding about the $3,000 request for children's mental health program for families with children. I see a community grant funding cannot be used to cover day-to-day operations. Well, I'd be happy to debate that, because I think lots of grants we give cover day-to-day operations. Anyway, I'd be happy to make a motion that we grant that request for MI understanding. So
I was going to turn it to our treasurer, Mr. Sheridan.
Thank you. I just have one comment on MI understanding. When I was researching it, when we received the application, it's listed as, it says it's nonprofit. When I looked them up on the Ontario registry, there is an MI understanding there listed as for-profit. So before we were to do anything in there, we would have to ensure that they are in fact nonprofit and not for-profit.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Treasurer. Okay for now, Jim?
yes, I still would like my motion to stand that we accept that. I know Dan said they're going to look into make sure, but I think when we get into children's mental health programs for families, I think it's something we need to take a look at. So I'll let my motion stand.
Thank you. Councillor McCauley.
Similar to those comments regarding MI understanding, if they are a not-for-profit, I do see this as a new initiative. So this would fall under the one-time funding, if I'm not mistaken, because it's helping them, start the initiative in our community. So really getting some clarity, and the application looks great. I know previous council and Treasury Department has done a great job with really trying to define that process. And I think there's a couple tweaks that you could make to that so that there's an understanding of what operational and what is not operational for people applying.
Okay. Counselor Clark?
Thank you, Your Worship. There was also an application that's not listed there, and I received a late email this afternoon. I think you received the same one.
Yeah.
And I forwarded on to the city manager and the treasurer and the rest of the council. It's from the St. Thomas Skating Club, and they submitted a grant request on January 12th. They were told at the time, according to the email, that there was intake in September and in January. They weren't told that January 1st was the deadline date. So they submitted it 12 days late. So I'm just wondering if we've had a chance to talk to them at all, or if the information that we've received in the email is incorrect, or whether or not there's an opportunity to take a look at the application, at least to consider it at a further council meeting. The event is the skating club's carnival. They haven't had it in 10 years. They're hoping to pull it off this year. And the date isn't till April 1st. So there's some time if we were going to consider it as legitimate, even though it was received. There's debate about whether or not it was received on time. There's still time for them to make it work. And I'd like to hear if there's any comments from the city manager or the treasurer. Thanks.
I'll go to the treasurer first. Mr. Sheridan?
Thank you. This report was done last week, and at that time, I didn't see that application. I'm not saying they didn't send it in, but it must have got lost in the process somewhere. If we would have had it, regardless of when it was actually sent in, submitted, we would have included it in the report for sure. It's that January 1st is not like a hard deadline that we wouldn't accept anything afterwards. So we put in everything we have. We'll have to find out what happened to that application and excuse me. And yeah, we can bring that back to council before in the near future.
Great. So we can have you take a look and bring it back. That's the right answer. And the MI one also, the questions that were asked here at council tonight, can we just get a verification back from you that will verify the reason they were not approved? Okay. Councillor Peters?
And will MI come back for discussion, or is direction being given to staff? Because my comment on MI, and I'm not, it's really important, but it strikes me, it's another example of the city being asked to fund things that are not historically ours to deal with. That the children's mental health historically is an issue that is supported by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care in the province of Ontario.
Right.
And, once again, we are being asked to pick up the pieces because another level of government is not dealing with some of these issues.
Right. But let's at least ask, Mr. Treasurer, you'll verify the questions that were asked here tonight about MI, and it may or may not come back based on what you find. Okay.
Yes, correct.
Councillor McCauley.
I see what you're saying, Councillor Peters. But I think that goes back to the application process and what we deem what we would fund. And I think that whatever funding we give should align with our strategy. And when you go back to our strategy, youth is on our strategy, as well as, in the plan. So I think there has to be something in the application process that as to how it aligns with our strategy.
Okay. And we have a promise from the treasurer to take a look at both and to bring back a report on them. Councillor Herbert?
Thank you, Worship. So do you want me to withdraw my motion to accept it until we hear from Mr.
I haven't heard
Sheridan?
a seconder for your motion, so I can't discuss it till that was to occur.
Okay.
I would think. I
Have
would
you
think
called
that
for a seconder?
when you move a motion, it's up to the other people in the chairs to come up with a second for it, so. I'm just suggesting, since we've asked the treasurer for another piece of action, that we can wait for that, but that's.
I'll
I
make it
shouldn't
easy
be
for you. I'll
speaking to
withdraw
it
my
either.
motion.
Right,
I
okay.
withdraw the motion till after we hear from Mr. Sheridan.
Okay. Okay, so on the reports that we have received, with a promise from the treasurer that some other information will come to us at a subsequent meeting or one following. Further discussion on the report. Councillor Clark.
I just wasn't clear whether Councillor Kohler's question was answered.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Kohler. Mr. Treasurer, did you get Councillor Kohler's question?
Yes, I did. As far as I know, I don't know what the movie is going to be. We'll have to contact them. I'm not sure how we decide what is appropriate or not, but we'll contact the organization and get an answer.
Okay,
Okay, and also just on if the criteria change, because I know several other events that would fit into the culture that could apply that didn't get this in the past. So just wondering moving forward, if some of those other ones could look at this and then reapply later on, knowing that the directions may be changed since it's aligned with some of our strategic plan.
okay. May I ask, Mr. Treasurer, if an application is received not in January and not in September, but in times in between, is it your intention that we would look at them as they come in or save them till the next time we're looking at applications?
The hope is to do it in twice a year, just to save multiple reports to council. But if something were to come up in between that, for sure, if something is time sensitive, we would bring it forward.
Okay. So if say another festival that came up for the middle of July and got to you in April or May, you'd take a look at it and probably bring it back as a one-off?
Correct.
Great. Further questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you for your report.
Your worship, unless there are any further items under corporate governance and administration, council will now reconvene into regular session. I have a motion that the recommendations, directions, and actions of council and committee of the whole, as recorded in the minutes of this date, be confirmed, ratified, and adopted. Moved by Councillor Gibson, seconded by Councillor Baldwin.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Carried.
No reports of committees this evening. We move to petitions and communications. First item is a request for a proclamation and lighting of the Jumbo Monument from the Canadian Congenital Heart Alliance. I have a motion that the Council of the City of St. Thomas proclaim February the 7th to the 14th, 2023 as Congenital Heart Disease Week in the City of St. Thomas, and further that the Jumbo Monument be lit in red from February the 7th to 14th, 2023. Moved by Councillor Wookie, seconded by Councillor Herbert.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried.
Second is a letter from Martez Hool at 56 Hink Street requesting on-street parking during the winter for residents of 56 and 58 Hink Street. Your worship, if it's the member's wish, I can have a motion prepared to refer the letter to the Environmental Services Department. Moved by Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Wookie.
Comments? Questions? Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. That motion carries. Any opposed? Okay.
Next item is notice received from the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority of a meeting to consider its 2023 budget. That meeting will be held on February the 22nd, 2023. The last item on the agenda is notice from the municipality of Central Elgin that its amended official plan has been adopted. A copy of the official plan can be viewed on the website noted on the agenda. Your worship, unless there are any further items from the members under petitions, we'll now move into council unfinished business. Seeing no items under unfinished business, your worship, now we'll move into new business.
Councillor Peters?
Thanks very much, your worship. We have a number of residents in St. Thomas who are now becoming very security conscious of their properties and, have been installing alarm systems, camera systems, but as well lighting systems onto their homes. And I know that our city bylaw touches on the issue of lighting being put on your home and how you illuminate your yard. But I'm aware of a couple circumstances around the city where there's some issues from neighbor to neighbor over how those lights are directed. I don't know whether there's anything that we can do to strengthen our bylaw or take a look at how other municipalities are doing, but we're certainly seeing more of it. I've seen it in my own neighborhood. And I just want to make sure that, we're good neighbors with one another. And I don't know whether I know the clerk has provided me with some information in the past and whether there's a potential for a report to come back to us, whether status quo is sufficient or should we be doing anything else?
Well, who are we asking?
Your worship, I believe Planning and Building Services may have some comments to make about this.
Great. Because I remember this coming up, and I know with Mr. Bray, it came up when we started to light trails. Because we had people suggesting lights from the trail, maybe mixing into their yards. Mr. Pompili, please share with us.
Through your worship's council, it's my understanding that the current bylaws that we have in place, and certainly I'm not an expert on when it comes to lighting, but it's definitely something I'd welcome to take back and look into. But most of it just deals with ensuring that lighting is directed away from neighboring properties. We have a lot of that with our commercial development. In terms of the lighting plans that are submitted with site plans to make sure that the lighting stays within the property that's intended to lighting and isn't providing light pollution on adjacent properties. It gets a little bit more complicated in residential properties, but I'm certainly happy to look into that and
Great.
report back through the clerk or through council.
Super, let's do so. Anything else under unfinished business or under new business? Go ahead.
Just a question about unfinished business. We said there was none, right? So is that just for this new council or does that go back to previous councils as a carryover?
What's your unfinished business, Councillor? We can make it this council's business too.
No, I just remember there was a couple outstanding things and I just didn't know if it's a small item, but for example, and it's probably fell through the cracks between new fire chiefs, but we were in the middle of looking at a new ladder truck. And the one that we were looking at, for example, was only going to go 14 stories. And now there's talk of maybe having the 15 and 16-story buildings in St. Thomas. So I had asked the question of the previous chief about a report back to us on what was needed and what we were forecasting out, because then it would allow planning some information
Great.
when they're trying to plan buildings. But it was a larger question. I think there was a couple other little things like that where I didn't know if because it was a fresh start with a new council or whether or not the things had
Or a
maybe
fresh
fallen-
fire chief.
Well, yeah, exactly. Or whether we just had let a couple things fall through the cracks, that's all.
Okay, great. Anything else under unfinished or new? I want to recognize Ken Monteith under new business. Ken's a longtime friend and mentor of mine, but better than that, from a political point of view, he was community person A1. There wasn't a fundraising plan on this earth that Ken wasn't part of. Rose and I go back a number of years at the United Way when Ken took over as chair and did that at a time when it wasn't easy to do. And then, of course, the work he's done with the hospice or the hospital or the, you name it, and his time with the Kiwanis Club and so many other things. I'm going to miss something, but I wanted to recognize Ken tonight and certainly pass our sympathies on to Luella, who certainly made Ken a very strong person. But Ken's former time as a member of parliament and warden of the county and reeve of Southwold Township certainly gives us cause to miss him greatly. His funeral will be on Wednesday, and I wanted to make sure that this council said some nice things about Ken on this night before, after his death and before his funeral. Rose? Sorry, Councillor Gibson. Got very familiar there, didn't I?
I have the same issue with past principals and teachers, calling them by their first name. Yes, I would just like to reflect that working with Ken at United Way, I learned a lot. He truly knew how to approach people, and he always said, you always make them your friend, and you don't accumulate your enemies, because you want everyone to be there for you, no matter how good or how bad the outcome is. You pick up and you move forward. And of course, as you know, I'm here today, and it's probably his words that brought me here, that kept me going. Thank you.
Okay, any other new business?
Your worship, can we observe a moment of silence?
Sure, I would
Please.
take that. Thank you very much. We'll miss you, old friend.
Your worship, next we move into bylaws. I have a motion that leave be granted to bring in the bylaws. Moved by Councillor Peters, second by Councillor Herbert.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried.
Have a motion by Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Herbert, that the bylaws be now read a first time, referred to council and committee of the whole, and read a second time.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. First bylaw, please. Thank you.
First bylaw is a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting held on the 6th day of February, 2023.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Item carried. Next bylaw, please.
Second bylaw is a bylaw to authorize mayor and clerk to execute and affix the seal of the corporation to a certain agreement between the city, the Canadian Mental Health Association, Thames Valley Addiction and Mental Health Services. This relates to homelessness prevention program service agreement.
Sorry. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Item is carried. Next bylaw, please.
Third bylaw is a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute and affix the seal of corporation to a certain agreement between the city and the inn. This relates to the homelessness prevention program service agreement.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Item is carried. Thank you. Next item, please. Thank you.
Fourth bylaw is a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute and affix the seal of corporation to a certain agreement between the city and Youth for Christ, also relating to homelessness prevention program service agreement.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Item carried. Next bylaw, please. Thank you.
The fifth bylaw is a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute and affix the seal of corporation to a certain agreement between the city and the YWCA, also relating to the homelessness prevention program service agreement.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Item carried. Next bylaw.
Sixth bylaw is a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute and affix the seal of the corporation to a certain agreement between the city and the West Algon Community Health Center, also relating to the homelessness prevention program service agreement.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, sorry, all those in favor? Any opposed? Items carried. Next bylaw, please. Thank you.
Seventh bylaw is a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute and affix the seal of the corporation to a certain agreement between the city and Fresh Start Support Services relating to homelessness prevention program service agreement.
Questions or comments? Seeing none? All those in favor? Any opposed? Item carried. Next bylaw, please. Thank you.
Eighth bylaw is a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute and affix the seal of corporation to a certain agreement between the city and Family Central Apartments relating to homelessness prevention program service agreement.
Questions or comments? Seeing none? All those in favor? Opposed? Items carried. Next bylaw, please.
Ninth bylaw is a bylaw to adopt official plan amendment 105 to the City of St. Thomas official plan. This relates to affordable housing development at 21 Kane Street, YWCA of St. Thomas, Elgin.
Questions or comments? Seeing none? All those in favor? Any opposed? Item carried. Next item, please.
10th bylaw is a bylaw to amend bylaw 50-88, being the zoning bylaw for the City of St. Thomas. This would allow an affordable housing development at 21 Kane Street.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Item carried. Next bylaw, please.
The 11th and final bylaw, Madam Chair, is a bylaw to authorize the mayor and clerk to execute and affix the seal of corporation to a certain agreement between the city and Her Majesty the Queen, actually the King and Right of Ontario, as represented by the Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade. This relates to an Ontario transfer payment agreement.
Questions or comments? Seeing none? All those in favor? Opposed? Items carried. I rise and report. Whoops. The successful passing of the bylaws. Thank you. It's the one item I didn't write down.
Your worship, at this time, I have motion by Councillor Peters, seconded by Councillor Herbert, that the report of council and committee of the whole on the 11 bylaws be received and adopted. The same be read a third time, engrossed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed and numbered.
Microphone, questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Carried.
No public notice this evening or notices of motion. There is a need to move into closed session. At this time, I have a motion that this meeting be closed to deal with a proposed or pending disposition of land, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land, and 2 personal matters about identifiable individuals. Moved by Councillor McCauley, seconded by Councillor Gibson.
Thank you very much. Before we go to discussion and vote, remind the folks at home, we'll be going into closed session. We will, when we are finished closed session, come back into open session only to vote on anything from the closed session or to adjourn for the evening. So for those watching at home, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next week. Questions or comments on moving to closed session? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you all.